before dawn. The fire is already burning low in the corner of the room. There are no windows, just clay walls, warm from the night, and the smell of wood smoke mixing with something alive. Something fermented and earthy rising from a clay bowl covered with a rough cloth. A woman is kneeling on the floor. Her hands are deep in dough, pressing, folding, pressing again. The sound is quiet and rhythmic, the soft resistance of flour and water being worked together on a stone surface worn smooth by generations of the same motion. She is not following a recipe. The recipe lives in her hands. Her mother taught her. Her grandmother taught her mother. And her grandmother's grandmother learned it the same way, in a room just like this one, 4,000 years ago. By the time the sun rises, the bread will be ready. And that bread, made with 2 ingredients and 2 bare hands, was more nutritious than anything sitting in your kitchen right now. The Bible doesn't describe one bread. It describes 8. 8 different breads, each one made differently, each one carrying a story that most people have never been told. And one of them contains a secret that died with the family who made it. A secret that temple authorities tried to steal, that master bakers from Egypt flew in to replicate, and that no one has been able to fully recover since the day the temple burned. We are going to walk through all 8 of them today. But first, pick up the bread in your kitchen right now and read the label out loud. Enriched wheat flour, high fructose corn syrup, soybean oil, calcium propionate, sodium stearoyl lactylate, azotocarbonamide. That last one, azotocarbonamide. It is also used to manufacture yoga mats. That is what is inside the bread on your counter. Not because it makes the bread healthier. Not because it makes the bread taste better. Because it makes the bread last longer on a shelf. Because shelf life is worth more than your life to the people who make it. The bread that woman was making before dawn. The bread that filled that clay room with warmth and smoke and the smell of something alive, was made from flour, water, and salt. That is it. And this is the bread Jesus held in his hands. And the science of why it was healthier than anything sold in any store today is something your doctor has probably never mentioned to you. Not once. Stay with me. Think about what you actually know about bread. You know it comes in a bag. You know there is white and wheat. You know the expiration date is printed somewhere near the twist tie. That is what most of us know. But in ancient Palestine, a child knew more about bread by age 7 than most adults know today. Not because they read about it, because they lived inside the process. They watched their mother kneel before dawn. They felt the dough between their fingers before they were tall enough to reach the stone mill. They knew which grain grew in which season, which flour made which bread, and why you never let the dough sit too long in summer. That knowledge was not written down. It was passed from hands to hands across 4,000 years like a living flame that never went out. This is the world Jesus was born into. Not a world of choices and convenience. Not a world of 47 varieties on a grocery shelf. A world where bread was not a product. Bread was a practice. A living thing passed from mother to daughter across generations like a sacred inheritance. And every kind of bread in that world told you something. About the family that made it, the occasion it was made for, and the God it was sometimes made for. We inherited that world, and then we walked away from it. We did not improve that bread. We broke it. Before we go any further, I want you to do something right now. Go to your kitchen, pick up whatever bread is in there, and count the ingredients on the label. Then come back and drop that number in the comments. How many ingredients are on your bread label right now? Because the bread that woman made before dawn had 3. And I want you to feel the distance between her 3 and your number before we go any further. This is the bread of escape, made in the dark, carried on a running back, born in the middle of the greatest miracle in the history of the ancient world. Picture the night. Egypt. 400 years of slavery. 400 years of brick and whip and borrowed children and borrowed grief. And then 10 plagues. And then the night of the 10th plague. And then Pharaoh, the most powerful man on earth, breaking completely, sending a messenger to Moses in the middle of the night with 3 words. Go. Now. Leave. and the Israelites ran. There was a woman in that crowd. She had dough prepared. She had been planning to bake in the morning. But there was no morning anymore. There was only right now, and the sound of 2 million people grabbing everything they could carry and moving toward the desert. She wrapped the unfinished dough in her cloak, threw it over her shoulder, and ran. Exodus 12 verse 39 tells us exactly what happened next. They baked unleavened cakes from the dough they had brought out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were driven out of Egypt and could not delay. That flat, unrisen, unfinished bread became matzah. And here is the detail that stops people cold. Jewish law says the entire process, from the moment water touches flour to the moment the bread enters the fire, must take no more than 18 minutes. Not 20, not 19, 18. Because after 18 minutes, wild yeast floating in the air begins to ferment the dough. And once fermentation begins, it is no longer matzah. It is something else. 18 minutes. That was not a recipe. That was a miracle with an expiration. And here is what makes this extraordinary from a nutritional standpoint. No yeast, no additives, no processing agents, no preservatives, flour, water, and a hot stone. And yet the glycemic response from ancient matzah is measurably slower than modern white bread despite being infinitely simpler. Ancient simplicity outperforms modern complexity. Every single time. You can make this today. 2 cups of flour, 1 cup of cold water, half a teaspoon of salt. Mix it. Knead it for 2 minutes. Roll it thin. Cook it on a hot skillet. 2 minutes per side. That is it. You just made the same bread that 2 million people carried out of Egypt on their backs. But if matzah was the bread of urgency, the bread of one impossible night, the next bread was the bread of every other morning. The bread Jesus prayed for. The bread that filled homes across Palestine with a smell so warm, so alive, so deeply human that it has no modern equivalent. And what made it different from anything sitting in your pantry right now is something almost nobody talks about. If you have never heard what made ancient sourdough different from the bread sold in every store today, stay with me. Because what is coming next is the reason your great-great-grandmother never had the gut problems that half the people watching this video are dealing with right now. And if this channel is new to you, subscribe now. Because this series goes deeper with every video, and you do not want to come in halfway through. Give us this day our daily bread. You have heard that prayer your entire life. This is the bread Jesus was talking about. And it was alive. Not metaphorically alive. Biologically alive. Teeming with wild yeast and bacteria that have been cultivated, fed, and passed down through families for generations the way some families pass down jewelry or land. Here's how it worked. Every time a woman finished baking, she saved a piece of the old dough. Not much, just a fist-sized piece. She set it aside in a clay pot, covered it, kept it somewhere warm. That piece of dough was her starter, her culture, the living colony of wild yeast and bacteria that would leaven the next batch, and the batch after that, and the batch after that. Some of those starters were decades old. Some were older than the grandmother who tended them. That small piece of fermented dough was worth more to a family than flour. Because flour you could grind. A living starter took years to develop. Now here is the science. And this is the part that changes how you think about your own body. Modern bread is made in 3 hours. From flour bag to store shelf in 3 hours. The yeast used is commercial yeast, engineered to work fast, to puff the dough quickly, to produce a soft loaf in the shortest possible time. Ancient bread fermented for 12 to 24 hours. During that long, slow fermentation, wild bacteria produced lactic acid and acetic acid. Those acids broke down the gluten molecules in the flour, the same gluten that causes digestive problems for millions of people today. They reduced the glycemic load of the bread so it did not spike blood sugar. They unlocked minerals in the grain, zinc, magnesium, iron, that the human body cannot absorb from raw flour without fermentation to release them. The slow fermentation was not tradition. It was biology. And we abandoned it Because fast is cheaper than slow and shelf life is worth more than gut health to the companies that feed us. When Jesus taught his disciples to pray, "Give us this day our daily bread," he was not asking for something from a plastic bag. He was asking for this, the slow bread, the living bread, the bread that took all night to become what it was meant to be. I want to ask you something before we go further. Have you ever made sourdough bread from scratch? From an actual live starter? Comment yes or not yet. I genuinely want to know how many of us have tried to find our way back to this. Now, those two breads, matzah and daily bread, were the breads of ordinary people living ordinary lives. But the next bread was below ordinary. The next bread was the bread of the poor, the bread that shepherds ate, that laborers ate, that fishermen packed in their bags before sunrise, the bread that wealthy families would not have been caught serving to guests. And it is the bread Jesus chose, specifically, deliberately chose, when 5,000 people were starving on a hillside and a small boy stepped forward with everything he had. Bread 3, barley bread. This is the bread nobody wanted, and the bread Jesus chose anyway. Picture the hillside. 5,000 people. Not 5,000 well-fed people at a festival. 5,000 hungry people who had been following Jesus for hours, away from their homes, away from their food, with nothing. And the disciples are looking at each other with the specific panic of people who have been asked to solve a problem they cannot solve. And a boy steps forward. Just a boy. He has 5 loaves of barley bread and 2 small fish. Not wheat loaves. Barley. Barley was the grain of the poor. It grew in soil too thin for wheat. It survived drought that killed wheat. It was cheaper, rougher, darker, denser, and every person on that hillside knew exactly what barley bread meant. It meant you could not afford better. That boy was not offering his best. He was offering his only. And Jesus took it. He did not ask if anyone had wheat bread. He did not send the boy away and wait for something better. He looked at the cheapest, humblest bread available, gave thanks, broke it, and fed 5,000 people until they could not eat anymore. Now here is what the wealthy people of that world did not know and what modern nutritionists have since confirmed. Barley has a glycemic index of 28. White bread has a glycemic index of 75. Ancient barley bread, dense, dark, heavy, kept a working man energized for hours without a blood sugar crash. No mid-morning collapse. No hunger spike 2 hours later. Sustained, steady energy from sunrise to midday. The poor man's bread was, nutritionally, superior to the rich man's bread. They just did not know it yet. Jesus didn't wait for wheat. He didn't ask for fine flour. He looked at barley, the bread of the overlooked, the bread of people who had nothing better to offer, and called it sufficient. There is something in that choice worth sitting with for a long time. Your recipe for barley bread. 2 cups of barley flour, available at any health food store. 1 cup of warm water. Half a teaspoon of salt. 1 teaspoon of yeast. Mix it. Knead it gently. Barley dough is stickier than wheat, less elastic, more honest. Shape it into a flat round disc about an inch thick. Bake at 375 for 20 to 25 minutes. Eat it with olive oil and a pinch of salt. That is exactly how they ate it. Barley was the bread of the poor. But there was another bread on the other end of the table entirely. A bread so carefully prepared, so deliberately made from the finest possible ingredients, that Abraham ran, and the text specifically says he ran, to make it the moment unexpected guests appeared at his tent. He did not know yet that his guests were angels. He only knew they deserved his best. And his best was bread. Bread 4, fine wheat bread. This is the bread you make when someone important is coming. And Abraham had absolutely no idea just how important. Midday, the heat of the day pressing down on everything. Abraham is sitting at the entrance of his tent when he looks up and sees 3 strangers approaching across the desert. And he runs. A man of his age and standing does not run to greet travelers. But Abraham runs. He runs to Sarah. He grabs her by the arm and says, and this is Genesis 18 verse 6, word for word, "Quick, Get 3 seahs of the finest flour and knead it, and make some bread. The finest flour. Not adequate flour. Not whatever is left in the jar. The finest. In the ancient world, finest flour meant wheat flour that had been sifted. Not once. The finest wheat flour available was sifted 7 times. 7 passes through a woven sieve, each one removing more roughness, more bran, more impurity, until what remained in the bowl was almost like silk, fine, white, powdery, almost weightless. Flour that took hours to produce. Flour that most families saved for guests and festivals and sacred offerings because it was too valuable for everyday use. That was the flour Abraham reached for. Now here is the thing that modern nutrition gets wrong about ancient fine flour. Even after sifting 7 times, ancient wheat flour was still stone-ground whole grain. The milling process and the sifting process left behind nutrients that modern industrial milling strips out completely. What Abraham called the finest flour still contained more nutritional value than what we sell today as whole wheat. Because our whole wheat is re-enriched, processed first, then artificially fortified to replace what the processing destroyed. What they called refined was still more complete than what we call healthy. 2 breads of the common people. 1 bread of the poor. 1 bread of the blessed. But we have not yet touched the bread that was never meant for people at all. The bread made specifically for God. The bread anointed with oil the way kings were anointed with oil. The bread where the ingredients themselves were an act of worship. And after that, the bread with the secret. The one that stayed fresh for 7 days with no refrigeration. The one that bakers from Egypt flew in to replicate and failed. The one whose recipe has been gone for 2,000 years and has never been recovered. That is next. And I promise you, you have never heard this story told the way it is about to be told. Bread 5, cakes with oil. This bread was never meant for human hands. It was not made to be eaten at a table. It was not made to fill a hungry stomach or warm a cold morning. It was made for one purpose and one purpose only. The altar. Picture a priest in the tabernacle. His hands are clean, ritually, ceremonially clean in a way that took hours of preparation. His movements are slow and deliberate. He is not cooking. He is not baking in any sense you would recognize. He is performing an act of worship with his hands, measuring fine flour into a clay vessel with the same focused reverence that another man might use to lay a crown on a king. Every measurement exact, every ingredient purposeful, because this bread was not for people. This bread was for God. Leviticus 2 verse 4 and 5 gives the instructions. Fine flour, olive oil, no leaven. Those 3 specifications were not arbitrary. Fine flour because only the best belonged on the altar. No leaven because leaven in the Bible symbolizes sin, something that puffs up invisibly, spreads through everything it touches, and changes the nature of what it enters. Nothing leavened, nothing impure, nothing that had been allowed to ferment with the yeast of the world could approach the presence of God. And olive oil. Here is what most people do not understand about olive oil in the ancient world. It was not a cooking ingredient. It was a symbol of the Holy Spirit. To anoint something with olive oil was to consecrate it, to mark it as set apart, belonging to God, removed from ordinary use. Kings were anointed with oil. Priests were anointed with oil. The tabernacle itself was anointed with oil. And these offering breads, these sacred cakes, were soaked in it, pressed through with it, brushed across the surface with it until the oil and the flour became inseparable. The bread was anointed the same way David was anointed, the same way Aaron was anointed. Bread, touched by oil, set apart, presented before God. After the memorial portion was burned on the altar, the rest was given to the priests to eat. This was part of how God fed the people who served him, through the offerings of the people they served. The gifts brought to God came back through the hands of his priests as daily bread. There is a theology in that worth sitting with. But if the offering bread was sacred, the next bread was something else entirely. Something that will make you stop and stare. 12 enormous loaves. A table made of pure gold. A A secret recipe that only one family on Earth possessed. Bread that stayed completely fresh for 7 days with no refrigeration, no preservatives, no explanation that satisfies modern science. And a mystery that has been sitting unanswered for 2,000 years. What you are about to hear is the reason I made this video. If you are not subscribed yet, do it right now. Because the next video in this series goes even deeper into the temple foods that have been hidden from modern Christians for centuries. You do not want to find this channel after that video is already out. Bread 6, the showbread. 12 loaves, a table of pure gold, and a secret that died the day the temple burned. Let me take you inside. The holy place of the tabernacle, and later, the temple, had no windows. No sunlight ever entered. The only light came from the golden lampstand, the menorah, burning continuously in the corner, casting everything in warm, moving, amber light. And there, against the north wall, stood a table. Not a wooden table. A table of pure gold, overlaid on acacia wood, 2 cubits long, 1 cubit wide, surrounded by a golden border, carried on golden poles through golden rings. A table that was never empty. A table that had one purpose and held one thing. 12 loaves of bread, arranged in 2 stacks of 6. Enormous loaves, each one weighing approximately 11 pounds. Each one requiring 5 pounds of fine flour to make. 24 loaves worth of the finest wheat flour, baked and stacked and set before the face of God. Fresh frankincense placed beside each stack, burning slowly, its smoke rising upward as a fragrant offering. And every single Sabbath, without exception, the old loaves were removed and new loaves were set in their place. For 1,000 years, every Sabbath, fresh bread, before the face of God, without interruption. The bread was called the lechem hapanim, the bread of the face, the bread of the presence, the bread that stood before the face of God and never left. Now here is the miracle. According to the Talmud, and confirmed by the historian Josephus, when the priests removed the showbread on the Sabbath, 7 days after it had been baked, it was still fresh. Not edible, fresh. As warm as the morning it came out of the oven. No mold, no staleness, no drying, no hardening of the crust. 7 days old and still warm in the priest's hands when he lifted it from the golden table. This happened every week. For 1,000 years. The rabbis listed it among the standing miracles of the temple. Not a one-time miracle. A weekly miracle. Bread that should have been stale and hard within 2 days staying inexplicably, impossibly fresh for 7. And only one family knew how it was done. The Garma family. They were the designated bakers of the showbread. Generation after generation. Father to son to grandson. The secret of how to prepare it, shape it, bake it, and remove it from the oven intact was passed down inside that single family and nowhere else. When the temple authorities decided the Garma family was being paid too much, they dismissed them. They brought in replacement bakers from Alexandria, Egypt. Master bakers, the finest in the ancient world. Bakers who had spent their entire lives working with grain and fire and heat. Those bakers could mix the dough. They could shape the loaves. But when they tried to remove the loaves from the oven, the bread broke apart in their hands. Every time. And the loaves they managed to remove went moldy within days. The Garma family was brought back and given whatever they asked. When the rabbis pressed them, "Why will you not teach this to anyone? Why keep this secret locked inside one family?" They answered with something that has stayed with scholars for 2,000 years. They said, "We know that the temple will one day be destroyed, and we are afraid that an unworthy man will learn how to bake the showbread and use the knowledge to serve an idol." They were not being selfish. They were being guardians. And then the Romans came in 70 AD, and the temple burned, and the Garma family, and everything they carried, burned with it. No one has fully replicated showbread since. The recipe is gone. A God-ordained bread, prepared weekly for 1,000 years before the face of God, exists now only in description. We know what went into it. We do not know how it was made to do what it did. I need to ask you something directly. Does it bother you that this secret is gone? That's something God specifically ordained, something that was present in his house for 1,000 years, died, and was never recovered? Because it bothers me every time I think about it. Tell me in the comments. Does the loss of the showbread recipe bother you? Because I want to know if I am alone in that. Bread 7, Ezekiel bread. This is the only bread in the entire Bible where God himself gave the recipe, and he gave it as a punishment. Ezekiel 4 verse 9. Read it slowly. Take thou also unto thee wheat and barley and beans and lentils and millet and spelt, and put them in one vessel, and make thee bread thereof. 6 ingredients. Not chosen for flavor. Not chosen for tradition. Chosen because they were whatever was left at the bottom of every storage jar when everything else was already gone. And God told the prophet Ezekiel to eat it. Not as a gift, as a sentence. Ezekiel was commanded to lie on his left side for 390 days, then roll over and lie on his right side for 40 more. During that entire time, 430 days, he was to eat only this bread, 8 ounces per day, and drink only 3 cups of water. He was not sick. He was not being punished personally. He was acting out what was coming for Jerusalem. A siege. The Babylonian army surrounding the city walls. The food running out. The people inside rationing whatever remained, mixing whatever grain they had left into a single desperate loaf. Not a recipe. A portrait of starvation. Ezekiel was living the prophecy in his own body so the people watching him would understand what was coming before it arrived. Wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, spelt, the last of everything, the bottom of every jar, mixed together because there was nothing left to keep separate. And then modern nutritionists looked at that combination and went quiet. Because that combination, that desperate, punishment, famine bread, creates a complete protein. Wheat and barley provide carbohydrates and some essential amino acids. Beans and lentils provide the specific amino acids that grains cannot. Together, the combination covers every amino acid the human body requires. Every single one. In a single loaf of bread. God told a prophet to eat punishment food and hid a superfood inside the judgment. This was not a health food recipe. This was the bread you make when everything else is gone. And it turns out that when everything else is gone, what remains is nutritionally complete. I will say what needs to be said plainly. Ezekiel bread, made the ancient way from those 6 ingredients, stone ground and slow fermented, is more nutritionally complete than any bread currently sold in any grocery store on earth. Not more expensive bread. Not artisan bread. Not organic bread from a specialty health store. Any bread. The punishment bread of a weeping prophet is better for your body than anything on the shelf. Let that sit for a moment. Bread 8, manna. And now we come to the last bread. The bread that ends everything. Because this one, unlike every other bread we have walked through today, was never made by human hands. No woman kneeling before dawn. No priest with clean hands and measured flour. No family with a guarded recipe. This bread came from somewhere else entirely. 2 million people. The Sinai Desert. 6 weeks out of Egypt, and already the food they carried is gone. There are no farms here. No grain. No ovens. No stone mills. There is nothing between 2 million starving people and the open desert except sand and heat, and a God they are not entirely sure they trust yet. They turn on Moses. They say, and you can hear the exhaustion and the fear underneath the anger. You brought us out here to die of hunger. And God says, I will feed you. The next morning, when the dew lifted from the desert floor, something was there. A thin, flaky substance. White. Delicate. Like frost. Like tiny seeds scattered by hands no one could see. The Israelites looked at it and said to each other, in Hebrew, Man-hu. What is it? And that became its name. Manna. What is it? Named after the question it raised because no one had a better answer. Exodus 16 verse 31 says it was white like coriander seed and tasted like wafers made with honey. Numbers 11:8 says when it was cooked, it tasted like something made with fresh oil. Sweet. delicate, rich. The bread of angels, Psalm 7:8 calls it. Food from another place, carrying the flavor of somewhere better than here. They could grind it in mills, crush it in mortars, boil it in pots, bake it into cakes. It was versatile and sweet and sufficient, and it came every morning without fail. But here is the miracle inside the miracle. If you kept manna overnight, it rotted. By morning it bred worms. It smelled. It became something you could not eat and could not ignore. You could not store it. You could not ration it. You could not hoard enough for 3 days because you were afraid of a desert and did not fully trust what was providing for you. You had to go out every morning and gather what was there. Every single day, for 40 years. The bread itself was a daily lesson in surrender, a daily confrontation with the question, do you trust that there will be more tomorrow? Because if you try to control it, if you try to hold more than today requires, it turns on you. Trust or rot. Those were the only 2 options. Except on Friday. On Friday, God said, gather double. Because no manna would fall on the Sabbath. And for the first time all week, the double portion did not rot. It stayed perfectly fresh through Saturday. God, who would not allow the manna to be hoarded on any other day, made a specific exception for rest. The Sabbath manna was protected. The Sabbath bread was set apart. He provided for hunger every morning for 40 years. And he provided for rest every Friday for 40 years. One miracle at a time. The morning the Israelites crossed into the Promised Land and ate the produce of Canaan for the first time, the manna stopped. Immediately. Completely. It was never seen again. It existed for exactly as long as it was needed, and not one day longer. Then Jesus stood up in a synagogue in Capernaum, 2,000 years after Moses, and said this. John 6 verse 32 and 35. It is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. Not I am like the bread of life. I am the bread of life. Manna was a shadow, a preview, a 40-year picture of something the desert could not contain and a plastic bag could never hold. The thread is pulling tight now. Stay with me for 2 more minutes. Because everything we have walked through today is about to become one thing. Step back. Look at all 8 of these breads at the same time. Matzah, made in the dark, in haste, on the night of the great escape. Everyday bread, slow, fermented, alive, the bread every family in Palestine depended on to survive. Barley bread, the bread of the poor, the bread of the overlooked, the bread Jesus chose when he could have chosen anything. Fine wheat bread, the best flour, saved for honored guests, offered to angels without knowing they were angels. Bread with oil, anointed, consecrated, set apart, never meant for ordinary hands. Showbread, always present, always before the face of God, never going stale, carrying a secret no one recovered. Ezekiel bread, made from scraps, made from judgment, nutritionally complete, a superfood hidden inside a punishment. And manna, the bread from heaven, falling every morning for 40 years, feeding those who trusted and rotting in the hands of those who did not. 8 breads, 8 stories, 8 completely different people in completely different moments reaching for bread and finding something more than bread. And every single one of them pointing in the same direction. He is the unleavened bread, pure, without sin, baked in urgency on the night of the great escape, so that those who ate it would be marked and passed over and free. He is the daily bread, present every morning, faithful every day. The answer to the prayer he taught us to pray before we understood what we were asking for. He is the barley bread, humble, common, chosen not because it was impressive, but because it was available and he was not waiting for something better, multiplied by grace until it was enough for everyone who was hungry. He is the fine wheat bread, the finest offering, given to honored guests, prepared with everything available because the one receiving it was worth everything available. He is the bread with oil, anointed, consecrated, set apart for holy purpose, carrying in his very nature the mark of the Spirit who descended on him at the Jordan. He is the showbread, always present, always before the face of God, never stale, replaced not because he grew old, but because the freshness was the miracle, renewed every Sabbath, every week, without end. He is the Ezekiel bread, the one who meets us in the siege, who takes the scraps of broken years and broken people and makes something complete from what remains, who does not require that we have something worthy to offer, only that we bring what is left. He is the manna, the bread from heaven, the bread no human hand conceived or made or deserved, the gift that arrived every morning and asked only one thing in return. Trust me for today, and come back tomorrow. You have been watching a video about bread. You were actually watching a portrait of a person. Every bread in the Bible was always pointing to him. Every grain ground on every stone. Every loaf shaped by every pair of hands before dawn. Every offering placed on every altar. Every miracle and every mystery and every secret that died in a burning temple. All of it. A portrait of one face. Here is the part that still stops me. Every single one of these breads can be made today. In your kitchen, with your hands, with ingredients you can find this week. The matzah, the slow sourdough, the barley loaf, the fine wheat bread sifted twice, the oil cakes, the Ezekiel bread with its 6 ancient grains, the honey wafers that come as close as human hands can get to the taste of manna, the woman kneeling by the fire before dawn. You can make what she made. You can hold what Jesus held. You can taste what he tasted. That connection is not gone. It was not destroyed. It was not taken away beyond recovery. It was only forgotten. And forgetting is something that can be undone. The next time you sit down to eat, tonight, tomorrow morning, whenever bread is on your table, I hope you see it differently than you did yesterday. I hope you see 4,000 years of hands in that loaf. Hands pressing dough on stone floors before sunrise. Hands measuring flour for an altar no one alive has ever seen. Hands saving a piece of old dough the way other families saved silver. Hands breaking bread on a hillside with 5,000 people who came with nothing and left with 12 baskets of leftovers. I hope you remember that the one who called himself the bread of life was not speaking in metaphor alone. He meant it more literally than we ever imagined. And every bread in this video was part of how he said it before he ever spoke the words. Next week we go deeper. The oils Jesus cooked with. The figs and dates and herbs that covered his table every single day. The foods his hands touched and his body was nourished by that modern science is only now beginning to understand. If this video gave you something, and I believe it did, that one will give you more. This channel exists for one reason. To recover what we lost. If that is something worth being part of, you already know where the button is. Subscribe so you do not miss a single step of this journey. And if you are not ready yet, I genuinely respect that. Drop a comment and tell me why. Not to argue, because I actually read them. Every one. Until next time, may you always have bread to break, and may you never eat it the same way again.